we start on the 17th. We have some interesting rosters returning, some interesting new people coming in, and I'm excited for the 17th to come around.
Mark, so how does that work? I remember Jenny once referring to summer-based training as the black hole. But it sounds like NCAA rules being what they are, they go to the black hole without your guidance and direction. How does that work?
The NCAA allows us a certain number of practice opportunities before our first competition. It allows us a certain date of the earliest competition, but every school starts classes differently. And so all over the Pac-12, there are different starting dates, but they're within a few days of each other. Again, of the fall sports, as far as I'm aware, we start the latest by a lot, a few weeks. So there's a period from the conclusion of outdoor track until the beginning of my time with the cross-country team when they have to do things on their own. And I think there are few teams in the country that do it better on their own than ours. While I haven't been meeting them, nor Coach Burrows, I'm sure they're running. I have no doubt they're running. With a roster and a culture as good as these are, if you don't, you're dead. And so the people who, one or two of them every year, try to take the summer off and see how it works out for them in September and October, quickly find out that they've been left behind.
So, two-part follow-up. Do you write them programs, or are they just going out and doing long, slow distance runs on Magnolia? How does that work? And also, I got the sense in watching that men's team last year at NCAA's, I think they referenced what happens in the summer, and I got the sense, especially after what you just said, that the leadership comes from within the team, because you're not out there to tell them what to do and how to do it. So it has to be senior leadership or experienced leadership within the team to make those things happen. How does that work?
Yes, the elders of the team call around. These days they text around or Twitter around, begin to gather the groups in early July probably, and kind of take control. While we can't, the coaches can't assign them workouts, organize workouts, witness them, some of the students are on campus for class, some of the students live in town. 2 weekends ago, I took the professionals that Heather and I coached to a training venue up in the mountains and bumped into some of the men's team up there training. And without those captains' practices, as we call them, we'd probably be in pretty big trouble. Everybody's in trouble that doesn't have their elders rounding up everybody and getting the work done in the summertime.
But can you write them a program? I mean, to give them the amount of miles?
I think you can. I think it's legal for us to send them something to do every single day, although we tend not to do that. Pierce Murphy is in Hawaii. Yeah, they're all over the place geographically, and to give them a Tuesday assignment would be a mistake, because they don't all have a track available, or they don't all have a 9,000-foot, 15-mile run available. So we give them general guidance. We leave at the end of the spring semester with general guidelines about what they need to try to get done, mostly volume-wise, the amount of miles they'll try to run, and a handful of very benign assignments, but not a formal program, not a day-by-day formal program.
Coach Wetmore, as I look at your roster, you have 4 returning point scorers, postseason point scorers on each side, particularly with the men's side, where you're tracking a 3rd straight national championship. Is that a typical base for you to work with, or is it a little low or high?
It is not atypical to have 4 or more varsity experienced returning athletes, but it is atypical to have 4 that are that good. We have 4 returning people from last year's team that were All-Americans. That's a pretty good place to start when you score 5. So not atypical to have 4 or 5, but it's rare to have them that are that good.
Coach Kritza talked about her recruiting process for volleyball. What can you discuss as far as the processes you have to go through, how early you have to recruit cross-country participants and, from around the country to ensure they come here, and how early is that started?
We cannot communicate with them. We can't initiate communication with them until July following their junior year. There are sports, I'm sure tennis, maybe volleyball, that can start talking to them more than a year before that. We're allowed to call them on the phone July 1st after their junior year. So we basically have about a year to work with, because their decision is pretty much done by a year later. Here, again, in this digital age, they can get to me with a couple of clicks of their mouse, and my recruiting coordinator, Billy Nelson, can get pretty near them with a couple of clicks of his mouse. So it's very different than it was 20 years ago when we were digging for information and digging for addresses and telephone numbers. But we've discovered that we do best with people who seem to have had some initial interest in Colorado to begin with. So the old days, you identified the very best kids in the whole country, and you tried to find their guidance counselor and get a letter to them over the summer and hope that they would respond. And I don't know if it's because I'm lazy or because I'm efficient that we've just found the 10th and 11th graders that have emailed us or sent us mail work out better in our recruiting process than even the 5-star blue chip people that we might dig up with a little more work. Anyway, it starts with them contacting us maybe earlier in their career. I get emails from 9th graders. We can respond to those. We can call them by the beginning of their senior year, invite them in on visits, find out who has the right look in his or her eye, and make offers to them. Men's track and field is allowed 12.6 scholarships over 5 years, and women's is allowed 18 over 5 years. But that's over all the events of track and field. There's no scholarships for cross country. So we're always working on almost always working on partial scholarships. I mentioned 5-star recruits. There's no such thing in track and field, but the equivalent would be the boy from Alaska who ran 4-minute in the mile, or the girl from Alabama who ran 13 seconds in the hurdles. We're rarely in the financial ballpark with those superstars.
Coach, how do you manage the expectations, especially on the men's side heading into this year?
Let's see. Well, I have my expectations, and I allow the team to have its expectations, and then I don't worry too much about anybody else's expectations. We get it that we're the defending champions. We get it that we have a good roster. When the rankings come out in a week or two, we'll be ranked number 1. What's disconcerting about that is if you finish second in the NCAA, you lost and you're defeated. But this is a good group. On the men's side, experienced, mature. They've been there before. They're less likely to make dumb mistakes when we get to the big race. So we feel good about it. What we have to manage is any sense of entitlement among them, or that they get cavalier about it, or that they get arrogant or rude about it. I don't see any evidence of that yet. That's what we're watching for mostly.
Coach, a lot's been said about the men's team, but the women's team with 4 returning scores, I think you get a couple runners back that missed last year. Are you as excited about them, or differently excited about them?
Definitely. We have a good women's team, better than a year ago when they got 7th. We return one of the top runners from 2 years ago who was out last year. This will be a team that can definitely challenge for the podium. And combined, the men and the women might be the best 2 teams we've had ever here. So I'm really excited about that.
Could you maybe talk a little bit about the top incoming freshmen? Are there any that you're more excited than others that could make an impact immediately on the team?
Well, there are 2 or 3 maybe women that can impact our varsity this fall. That's a little easier for women than it is for men. We have a woman coming from Arizona named Danny Jones, one from Pennsylvania named Brianna Schwartz, who were among the best in the whole country in middle and long distance running. Whether they will be good enough to make our team better enough that we would take the red shirt off of them, it will be the question. That they could make the 6th or 7th or 8th or 9th spot for us and compete in the Pac-12 or maybe even the NCAA still doesn't mean we would use them, because if they can't change our score in the top 5, it would be better to save them. So those 2 freshman women are very good. There's a sleeper girl from way up in the Colorado mountains named Tabor Scholl. She was a small schools, many-time state champion. She wouldn't normally be on anybody's radar, but she's a big talent and done an awful lot of work all by herself for 4 years. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when she plugs into a group of 10 or 12 women working hard. On the men's side, there's 2 guys that could potentially help us. A boy from Washington named Johnny Dressel and a boy from Minnesota named Joe Klecker. They're nationally ranked and very accomplished, but a 17-and-a-half or 18-year-old guy trying to make this team is a long shot. As it's been mentioned, we have 4 returning very good men. We have a guy back from a year before who didn't run for us last year. He's very good. Our top 5 are probably solid. If no one gets hurt, it's hard to beat. We have returning, experienced juniors, but that's 7, and you run 10 at the conference meet. And so 1 or 2 of those freshmen might get a spot.
Coach, Nick Harris transferred from Washington. He's a local kid as well. Can you talk about him and what future impact he might make on this team?
Nick has been at Washington for a couple of years. His credentials are primarily as a middle distance runner, an 800 and 1500 meter runner. They're good credentials. When he contacted us exploring the possibility of a transfer, that's where we were looking for help in the 800 and the 1500. So far, he doesn't have monster cross-country credentials, but who knows what happens when he starts hanging around with monsters. So maybe. Probably not 3 months after arriving here, but maybe next year. Anyway, he's used his red shirt already at Washington. He has been granted a waiver of the residential requirement, the Pac-12, so he can compete for us right away. He'll be in uniform for us one way or another if he's healthy this fall. Just maybe not enough time and not enough mileage to impact the top 7.
Could you talk a little more about Tabor? Obviously, she basically didn't have a high school team. She ran with her brother and her parents, and they both have monster VO2 max type stuff. What do you see in her in an upside, especially coming from such a small town?
Well, Tabor Scholl is from a tiny little place over the divide, 8,000 feet, 9,000 feet. Was homeschooled, but ran some for, I think, 2 different schools. Finally ended up just staying on her own her senior year, but she has excellent track credentials for somebody who has less than excellent access to a track. She's got good leg speed. She's got good middle distance accomplishments. Not a lot of volume in her life. A very active family, so every day is bicycling or Nordic skiing or running or I don't know what else, but there isn't 70 miles in a month in her life, let alone in her week. So what we liked about her most was her room for growth, her original talent and her room for growth. It's going to be a big switch for her from being homeschooled and being with her family way up at 9,000 feet kind of isolated to being down in Boulder on a college campus with all the distractions of that. But it'll be interesting. She's really talented. She's going to be good.
Coach, you're entering your 21st year. Do you take every new season as its own book, or is it a chapter within the book of your career?
Well, let's see. I think I said this a year ago, and I said it the year before. Every year is different. The opponents are different. The teammates, the team members are different. Even each individual teammate is different from what he or she was a year ago. The science of the sport evolves. Coach Burrows and I try to keep abreast of that, keep learning. So really, every year is a new story. I don't know if it's a new book or a new chapter, but that's what keeps it fresh and keeps it exciting. And as most of you know, we have some very successful post-collegians around here. They've just come back from racing over in Europe. They're on their way the end of this week to go race at the World Championships in China. One would think that racing in the capitals of the world would be all-encompassing to my attention and enthusiasm, but I might be on an airplane coming home from Monaco, and I'll have my notebook out, and I'll be making my guesstimated hierarchy of the college team and who will fit in where. And so far, I don't lose the enthusiasm for the college men and women. It gets a little wearing sometimes. There was a year I came home from the World Championship. I think it was 2008. It was in China, as a matter of fact, the Olympic Games. And I went in the front door of my house, and I put down my Beijing China bag and picked up my preseason cross-country camp bag and went over the mountains to what is it over there?
Grand Lake?
Grand Lake, yes, without even stepping in the house. So it can get wearing, but the enthusiasm stays the same, the challenges stay the same. And this is a special team coming up. It's going to be fun.